Welcome, everyone, from an absolutely gorgeous day here on the campus of Notre Dame. It's sunny out. It's going to be about 50 degrees this afternoon, which, coming off of those single-degree temperatures, has students walking around in flip-flops and shorts and T-shirts, not quite what we would be wearing, but they're certainly enjoying the relative sun and warmth here on campus. Our positive cases for COVID as of yesterday were 24 new cases, which is down considerably from what it's been. Our 7-day trailing average is about 1.1% positivity rate, which is down from about 1.5% a week ago. So the numbers are still higher than we would like to see, but they're clearly trending in the right direction. And the great news is that students, the vast majority of students, they really want to be here, and they're trying to make things work under these adverse conditions. We also got some really good news in the state of Indiana. They've been doing an excellent job as a state with the distribution of the vaccine. They announced that yesterday all those who are 55 and older in the state are able to receive the vaccine. And then yesterday as well, Notre Dame announced that we are going to host on March 26th and the 27th a large-scale vaccination event. Actually, over those 2 days and possibly a third day will be added on in the Compton Family Ice Arena. From 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., we'll be distributing vaccines to those here on campus that and beyond throughout the community that actually conform to whatever the state regs are at the time. As I said, right now it's 55 and up, but by March 26th it may be lower than that. So we're really excited to be playing a role and spreading the vaccine to so many. So that's a real positive. Activities on campus. We've opened up more outdoor activities for the students, including we put in some curling ice rinks behind the Morris Inn, and students have been signing up in droves to curl and to be out there having refreshments behind the Morris Inn and enjoying themselves. We just announced that we're going to be welcoming a limited number of students for the basketball games and for our volleyball games indoors, and of course maintaining all the physical distancing regs. And then as more and more of the spring sports open up outdoors, those will be additional activities that will add to some sense of diversion for our students. We had our first mini break yesterday. It was kind of called in many ways a mental health day. There were no classes and there were no meetings, no Zoom calls to be held for the students. And we'll have 2 more of those coming up, spread throughout the rest of the semester. So we're trying to do everything we can amidst these, again, adverse conditions to attend to not just the COVID restrictions, the spread of the disease, but also the mental health needs of our students. Finally, tonight, we are going to have a special memorial service for the 2.5 million people globally who have lost their lives to date via COVID. It's going to begin at 5:40. The bells will toll from the Basilica, and then at 6 p.m., Father Pete McCormick, the head of campus ministry, is going to offer a prayer service at the Father Soren statue on the South Quad, and then there will be a procession that will go to the grotto for prayers for all those victims and their families. But today we're joined with a very special guest, and I'm really excited to be able to ask some questions to my good friend and an amazing leader of the university. Dr. Ann Firth is the vice president and the chief of staff to the president of Notre Dame, Father John Jenkins, our 17th president. And she, in that role, her responsibilities include advising the president managing the staff and the operations of the office, serving as the liaison, the primary liaison with the university's Board of Trustees. She also works very closely with the university's budget working group, with the faculty board on athletics, and with the president's leadership council. And she's also very involved with Father John in the planning and the arrangements of all of our commencement ceremonies. It's a big role. She joined the office of the president in November of 2011. Prior to that, Ann had received both her bachelor's and her law degree from Notre Dame. After practicing law in Chicago for a period of time, she then came back to the university and worked in student affairs. And she was the first person to be the director of the Office of Residence Life. She did that for 6 years and all worked for 25 years with our students in various capacities in student affairs. So she has a heart and a pulse for what is going on with our students here on campus, which is wonderful for the last 10 years that she's been in this role, roughly serving Father John in the president's office. Ann and her husband, John, who was also a double domer, undergrad and Notre Dame law degree, are the parents of 5 wonderful children, all 5 of whom are Notre Dame graduates, and their one son, John, who went on to pursue his PhD in economics from MIT, just came back this year to join the Notre Dame faculty in economics as a distinguished professor working on the area of India and Indian economy. And he's teaching 2 classes here this semester, so we're thrilled to have him back here on our faculty. So without further ado, Ann, thanks so much for joining us today. And I wanted to begin with maybe something people don't know about you, is that you grew up in a family of immigrant parents, and German is actually your first language. Could you tell us a little bit about growing up in an immigrant family, and then how did you make your way to Notre Dame?
Thanks, Lou, and thank you for that great introduction and the opportunity to talk today with you and with everyone who's joining us. It's really a pleasure. And before we turn to the story of my growing up, I just want to say a big thank you to you, Lou, because you have done an incredible job of keeping the Notre Dame family connected during these unusual and challenging times. These conversations that you've had with different members of this campus community, I know how much they mean to everyone, and we sure miss everybody a lot, and it's a great way to stay in touch. So I just want to thank you for that and for your leadership on so many fronts. But you and I have been friends for a long time, and I just want to say in front of everyone here, I tease you a lot, but I just want to say publicly how much I cherish you as a friend and as a colleague, and how privileged I feel to work with you. So let me start with that. So yes, I was blessed to have wonderful parents who made their way to this country after the Second World War. They grew up in Germany. My father was drafted into the German army during the Second World War. He was a doctor, and he served in the army and was then on the Russian front, and he was captured by the Russians and spent 4 years in a Russian prison camp. And it's quite a miracle that he survived. He endured, terrible hardship and torture. He tried to escape several times, but by the grace of God and the kindness of actually a Russian doctor that he met while he was in the prison camp, he eventually made his way home. He was among the German prisoners that were kept by the Russians as slave labor after the war ended. So it was actually a couple of years after the war had ended. And certainly, there was a great deal of the Germans did many terrible things during the war. Obviously, the Russians were also known for their cruelty. But at any rate, he made his way home. And when he had regained his strength, he went to work for...
Didn't the Russian doctor offer a special, could you add that piece to the story?
Sure, glad to. So my father was really, I think, at the end of his his strength, both physically and spiritually and mentally, after 4 years. And he befriended the Russian doctor who was the doctor for the prison camp where he was being held. And the doctor agreed to swap out his chest X-ray. The Russians feared tuberculosis in the prison camp because it would mean the death of many of their of those that they had imprisoned there. And so the Russian doctor actually switched the X-rays of another prisoner for my father's, and said that he had tuberculosis and needed to be sent home. And actually, he also released the other person whose X-rays they actually were. And so it was really a blessing. And I owe that doctor really so much. And the lives of all of us would be quite different, of course, without
Right.
that act of kindness. So my father went to work at an American infirmary. He met my mother, they married. And after a few years, my father came home one day. He was really encouraged by the American doctors he met working at the American infirmary, and they agreed to sponsor him. And they really encouraged him to make a new life. So my father came home one day and said to my mother, "How would you feel about moving?" And she said, "Well, my place is with you. I go where you go. What do you have in mind?" And he said, "I want to go to the US." And they made their way here with really nothing, and built a life for themselves. And my parents always said that one of the happiest days of their lives, alongside their wedding anniversary, the day of their wedding, and the day that, of course, their children were born. And I think I'm certain I'm the favorite of the three. I'm certain that's true. One of the happiest days of their lives was the day that they became American citizens. So they loved this country a great deal. But I was raised in a very German household. We spoke German at home. It was important to my father that we would understand our heritage and retain it. Certainly the cuisine and everything about it was very German. We would go back often to visit all of the relatives in Germany. I spent summers with my grandmother in Germany. So it was a rich and wonderful growing up. I will say that as I think is true for many immigrants, there's a sense of being between two worlds. My parents loved the Germany that they grew up in, though that no longer existed really. And they also loved their new country. And so I think they often found themselves between those two worlds. And as a kid growing up, I have to say, all the relatives were back in Germany, and I felt that pull in certain ways as well. It wasn't really until I came to Notre Dame through a very happy circumstance. The principal of our school had to step away due to some health issues, and a Holy Cross priest, Father Joe O'Neill, happened to fill in for a year. And I had no idea where to go to college. My parents were not particularly knowledgeable about US colleges and universities. And I happened to speak to Father Joe, and he said, Ann, I think you should think about Notre Dame. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll do that. So I applied, never visited until I came as a freshman. But what happened when I arrived here on campus is that I felt a sense of belonging that I'd actually never experienced before. And so in some sense, coming to Notre Dame was a real sense of homecoming for me, for someone who had grown up as I had, again, with much love and with wonderful parents, but not that rootedness perhaps that I felt since I've become part of this Notre Dame community. So it means a lot to me. And that sense of homecoming that I experienced here is something that I hope every person who's part of Notre Dame experiences. And that's been part of what I hope I've been able to contribute to.
It's an amazing story, and as I listen to it, and I've heard it a few times before, I'm always deeply moved, and I feel compelled to offer a prayer of thanks first for that Russian doctor who took risk to save your father, who um, he clearly loved and was inspired by, and to think that gave possibility to bringing you here, and then Father Joe O'Neill playing the role and bringing you and your family to Notre Dame. has been nothing short of a godsend. And it makes me think too about how Notre Dame has always been there for the waves of immigrants, those that are coming from, the refuse of our teeming shores, and as they say, and to embrace them, whatever background that they have. It's an important memory that we need to carry, going forward. So can you just speak a little German for us? I mean, I love to hear a little bit of your first language. We don't get that much
Sure.
around here.
Deutsch ist meine erste Sprache. And I know, Lou, this comes from a deep sense of envy that you have. You being Italian, I know you wish you were German. I know you wish that, beer and schnitzel was part of your heritage. All you've got is pasta and wine. So I understand your pain.
It's such a romantic language, and just to hear how it just rolls off your tongue. And
Yes,
I
isn't
would
it?
say, if you're going to go to Europe, fly Lufthansa, but dine with the Italians, which is great. All right, on a more serious note, um, I've heard people say that there's many ways to experience Notre Dame, right? As a student, as an alum, uh, as an employee, but none beats the role of being a Notre Dame parent. And you have blessed Notre Dame with it by entrusting five absolutely wonderful kids, all different. Can you tell us a little bit about how a place that you've known so well and you have been so devoted to, how has that role of being a Notre Dame parent deepened your relationship and shown you new sides of Notre Dame?
I have to say that, and I feel that Notre Dame is such an integral part of my life. It's where I was formed and educated, and met my husband here, and been so privileged to work here. But nothing means more to us, and I know I speak for my husband John as well, than the education our children received here, and to watch them grow. We have five very different children. I know you have five. You and Carmen have five children as well. Our kids are each very different, but they each found a place at Notre Dame, a home at Notre Dame, and pursued their interests and made friendships and grew into adults that we so admire and couldn't be prouder of. And so, the debt of gratitude that we feel we owe to Notre Dame for what they've done for our children, that goes beyond words, and honestly means more than any gift anyone could give us. To do that for our children, to see them formed. It's not only the superb education they received, and it's also, their understanding of what it means to live a good life, to be a generous person, to be a person of service. And I like to think some of those things were lessons that they also learned at home. But what I know with certainty is that those lessons were deepened and really took root and became integral parts of who they are, through their experiences at Notre Dame. And that means more than anything else in the world.
In your wildest imagination, did you ever think that you might have a son or a daughter be a professor?
Never.
Yeah.
Never. And not, when our son went off to pursue his PhD, it was obviously a wonderful thing for us. We didn't necessarily think he'd make his way back here, but as he was in the process of discerning where he might begin his career, it was so clear that the mission of the place meant a lot to him. He actually had a transformative experience when he was a junior. He lived in Dillon Hall, and every year Dillon sends one student to Uganda, to the Holy Cross School there, to work with 7th and 8th grade children and teaching them math. And so John did that for a summer. And I have to say, I think he was on a different trajectory until that time, but he spent that summer in Uganda, and it was so transformative. And he's still in touch with some of his students from that time, and they've become an integral part of our life. We've actually helped one of his students to pursue his education. He's now a doctor. And so from this experience in the summer of, teaching these kids 7th and 8th grade math, our son discovered a commitment to thinking about solutions, systemic solutions to issues of poverty, of access, and that set him on a trajectory which has led him to make this his life's work as a development economist. And we couldn't be more proud and again more grateful through that experience that he had that summer. His life was really transformed.
That's a great story. But one that is repeated time and again is Notre Dame students have that experience, global experience, as part of their 4 years here that opens up their hearts and changes their career paths. Tell us that you've been so devoted to the Notre Dame student. I mean, 25 years working in student affairs, the difficult work of handling kind of disciplinary matters. Can you tell us a little bit about your student affairs experience, what you've learned over the years? Has the student body changed over that period of time much, or the same basic principles at hand?
Mm-hmm. I consider it one of the great privileges of my life to have had the opportunity to work with so many Notre Dame students. I have to say, our students give me such hope for the future. They are incredible. They are so bright. They are so good. They are faith-filled. They have such hearts for service. That's not to say that there aren't challenges and that they don't make mistakes. They do. We all do. I have to say they are incredible. And I think those of us that graduated in the 80s often say that that the students of today are smarter than we were. I personally think that might be true. I see these students and I see what they know and the way that they are interested in the wider world, and it really is inspiring. So I do think that life is complicated. I don't know that life has ever not been complicated when you're 18 to 22 years old, but I do think there are pressures today that are perhaps even greater, that have become even greater for these students. So I think that the myriad of resources that the university provides, and in some sense the strong sense of community that's so important here is really has never been more important for these students, because I think that sense of connection, that sense of belonging, that sense of a safety net of people around you that care about you, that's something that students of today need. I suppose we all need that, but I think the pressures of our modern times are such that perhaps that's an even greater need now than it once was. So I think that obviously what we offer students has evolved over time, but some of those core tenets are really important and speak to some of those really important human longings that are part of becoming an adult.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was almost 10 years ago, actually 10 years ago this November, that Father John pulled you out of student affairs and brought you into the president's office. And you've been a wonderful duo and for the last decade. And your role as vice president and chief of staff, there is some rhythm to it. There's some things that you have core responsibilities for and you get used to, but there's a lot of the work that is unpredictable. There's issues that emerge, there's projects that emerge, and you play a really critical role. Can you tell us about the role of chief of staff and how that plays out here at Notre Dame with Father John?
Mm-hmm. You're right. There are a number of things. There are many things actually in any given day that could emerge, and I think that's something that I think is a commonality with my years in student affairs. You get used to in student affairs responding to the needs of the time, while also having longer term priorities and strategies. So you don't want to be entirely at the mercy of reacting, but it's important to have that flexibility and that ability to multitask and respond as needed. So I think that a few years ago we were lucky enough to invite to campus two former chiefs of staff to the President of the United States. We had Dennis McDonough and Andy Card here. And so I was really interested in what they were going to say. I'm not comparing my job to being chief of staff to the leader of the free world, but I was super interested in what they had to say about being a chief of staff. And Andy Card said that he thought that one of his most important tasks, and I was listening with rapt attention, he said was to make sure that the president was in a good mood. Because the weighty decisions that the president of the United States has to make are not helped if if he is distracted by by other things. And so he saw his role as helping the president to stay in a good mood. Dennis McDonough said it was a matter of making sure that the right things got in front of the president, and that in his case, President Obama was not distracted with decisions that he didn't need to make. So again, I thought those were rather interesting insights, and I wouldn't say that's the sum total of the position, but I do think in some sense they reflect that idea of helping the president prioritize, and Father John's been incredibly generous in sharing with me what his priorities are. And so, a big part of my job is ensuring that we make progress on those things that are foremost on his mind. And, it's a great job. I love what I do. And, to work with Father John is such a privilege. No 2 days are alike. I love that about the work. I also think a key part of the role is to serve as connector, communicator, and as advisor to provide insight as I can, and to do it always with the knowledge that Father John is the president. Dennis McDonough also said that the most important words in the title Chief of Staff are the words of staff. And I found that to be an accurate statement. So it's a great role, and at a place that I love so much, and with a leader that I couldn't admire more. So I feel very blessed.
Yeah, there's no doubt we're privileged to serve the mission of Notre Dame, but also to serve under the leadership of Father John, and it's amazing in the 16th year, um, just who he is and how he has led this university and how he's inspired all of us, I think, to be better in his charge. But you've been a really important filter for so many of us too. So we, myself, and many others, who report to Father John, will come to you and say, when is the right time? With all that he's got on his plate, pulling him in many different directions, how should we go about this to strategize? You've been such a terrific leader in your own right, and you've helped to make sure that the trains are moving on time, and things are incredibly well organized in the office. I think your Germanic tendencies really play well to this role. But tell me a little bit about how, giving all of these demands, some which require the president to be reactive to crises and challenges, how do you establish priorities? How does Father John look at kind of the long-term priorities of the university, and to kind of set the chart for moving forward?
That's a great question, Lou. And I think that, in certain ways, if you were to look at, Father John's resume, it's unusual in many regards. First of all, a priest president, we're very blessed that way. Father John, obviously is a priest of Holy Cross, brings a dimension to his leadership that is unique and I think distinctive and so important in terms of the mission of the university. And it also allows him to be a pastoral presence to the Notre Dame community, which I think is such a rich and important dimension. He's also a very noted philosopher, an expert on Thomas Aquinas, and so he thinks deeply about things, really deeply about things, and that's a wonderful quality in someone who's leading a complex organization like Notre Dame that is really unique as the premier research Catholic university in the world. And so he's very intentional about what he thinks about what's important. He thinks about what matters. He thinks about what will make a difference. He thinks about how it will impact the people who are part of Notre Dame. And so those skills and that knowledge and that discipline he has as a philosopher are incredibly valuable. On top of that, of course, he has a wonderful executive decision-making ability. He comes to decisions, and he's able to make hard decisions when they're necessary. And so all of that together, in some sense, makes him an ideal president. And so The other thing I would say about Father John, he's not only is he intentional in the way that he thinks and the way that he approaches problems and opportunities, he's also very intentional about his time. And it's very important to him to have time to think, to have time to pray. And so I think that in some sense, there's a centeredness about Father John, which I know you see on a regular basis as well. And I think that that feeds him in his work, and really as a result of that, it feeds all of us. Because one thing I would say about Father John is that there's a wonderful esprit de corps amongst those of us who serve with him and for him. Because we see how he is living into his role and how he provides leadership and the humility and grace and faith with which he does that. And I think that sets a tone for the rest of us. And, I want to be worthy of the good example that he sets. And that's something that inspires me each and every day.
Yeah, he also has a really quick wit, as
He
you know.
does. He's very funny.
He
Yes.
is very funny, right? And so I was in the other day in his office, and I said, Father John, I said, been in this role 15 years. I said, most presidents of major universities don't make it a third of that time. And I said, and yet now you're confronted with a global pandemic, um, you know, racial unrest across the country, and a lot of economic dislocation, and on top of everything else. And he said, he just looked at me and he goes, I know. And he goes, and I thought the job was tough before this, so, you just got a chuckle and you moved on. But tell us a little bit about those two issues, which have really come to the forefront, dealing with the pandemic and also kind of issues of racial justice and inclusion and equity. How has that kind of changed your role in the work that we're doing here at the university
Mhm.
in the past year?
Yeah. So I think that with regard to the pandemic, thank you for that great update you provided at the outset too, Lou. We're all working, I think, and our students first and foremost, doing so much to make this a successful semester. Our students, our faculty, our staff, everybody is all in and working so hard. Of course, the pandemic has shaped everything. There's nothing untouched by it, and of course, with 500,000 people who've lost their lives and so many others that have had health consequences. There's no family, no person who's been untouched by it, and even more globally, of course. But in terms of life here on campus, obviously keeping everyone safe and healthy is job number one. And it's been an incredible inspiration to see the generosity of so many, to make that happen. As you and everyone else knows, we've set up this testing center. We have weekly surveillance testing for students now, and biweekly testing for faculty and staff, and a whole host of teams of people set up to deal with all the aspects of the pandemic. But what I noticed perhaps most, and I'm not in no way minimizing all the challenges and tragedies of the pandemic, but I think perhaps adversity makes us reflect on what's most important. And I see that so deeply in people here, that there's an appreciation for what it is that we're doing here, for being here, and that's incredibly inspiring. I've heard from my own son and from other faculty that many students at the end of class, in-person instruction, will walk up and say as they're exiting, thank you to their instructor. And I know my son said to me, I've never seen that before, Mom. I've never seen that level of gratitude, that level of appreciation. And he said, it's quite special. So I think there's a deep appreciation amid the challenges, and nobody is minimizing that the challenges are many, but it has been really extraordinary to see that Notre Dame spirit and to see everyone come together. You mentioned, of course, the topic of racial justice, and which, of course, has come into such sharp focus for all of us in new ways as a result of the tragedies of last summer with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others. And Certainly, those are issues that have been incredibly important to me throughout my career, both in student affairs and now in this work. And I have to say at this moment, well, I think there are many points of pride for the university. We've done some important work with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's more to do, and I think that that's something that that all of us would acknowledge. But I see momentum at this time. I see hope at this time. I see forward motion in new ways, everything from the establishment of the Center for Race and Resilience in Arts and Letters to some of the programming being offered through the Clow Center on building an anti-racist vocabulary, to consideration of adding to the core curriculum courses that deal with equity in various disciplines, to the creation of a trustee task force that Father John and Jack Brennan established in September to take a look from a sort of systemic and perspective, institutional and strategic perspective, what we're doing in this regard. So I think there's lots of reason for hope, and I think one of the things about the conversation about diversity and equity inclusion that I think is so important is that I think that here at Notre Dame we have a really rich vocabulary to talk about these critical issues. Our Catholic faith, those concepts are so central to our faith and to the gospel call. And so I think that we have a way of thinking about that is part and parcel of our faith and our identity. And I think that that gives us, again, a vocabulary, a foundation to build on that perhaps other places don't have. So I think it's central to who we are and what we do.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. On maybe a lighter note, and you have served with Father John now for almost a decade, and you've got to see him in the best of times and also in the most challenging moments. What are some of your favorite memories that built up over that time that maybe others might not have seen as closely as you do?
So there's so much really when it's hard for me to pick a single or a few. But one of the things about Father John that I think say so much about him is to see him with his family. He's one of 12. That Jenkins family, they are the nicest people. They are incredible, and there's a warmth there, and a generosity of spirit and a love that just radiates forth. And there's 12, but they know they know a lot about each other's lives, and they're close knit. And Father John knows each of his nieces and nephews really well, and now their spouses, and it's wonderful to see him. And he's just John to them. He's
Right.
he's just one of the gang. And so I love seeing Father John at some of us sadly, when his mom passed away a few years ago, you and I had the opportunity to be at that funeral, and so obviously a sad occasion and a great loss because Mrs. Jenkins was an incredible lady. And an extraordinary mother and such a person of faith. But to see that family together and to see the bonds between them and to see just John interacting with them and having fun and laughing and I think that understanding of family really shapes who Father John is. And he brings that to pastoral settings, to his work, to his scholarship, to what he does as president. And that's a very rich foundation.
No, that's a great insight, Ann, because I think sometimes people will look at Father John and see him as a celibate priest, and he doesn't understand what we're going through as a family. Well, when you have 12 siblings, you've seen it all, and he is still
Seen it all.
he's still very, very close, and he comes from incredible stock. I mean, it's a incredible parents, great siblings, and nieces and nephews. It's a great point, and it's a great reminder. Just a couple closing questions. Um, First, about any meaningful initiatives that you've worked on during your time in the president's office that just stand out for you? I know that's a really hard question, but something that maybe you haven't had a chance yet to reference that you might bring up.
So I guess two things come to mind, Lou. The first would be planning the funeral for Father Ted, who was so important in my own life, and was president when I was here, and was incredibly kind to me always, and just such an important figure to all of us. But he outlived several of his funeral planning committees, and so by the time that day had finally arrived, I was together with Father Bill Lease. I was co-chairing that committee, and so to plan that celebration of his extraordinary life was really, really special. And others have talked about the funeral procession after the mass, the beautiful mass in the basilica, where we walked to lay Father Ted to rest, and we walked outside, and the students had lined up. It was a bitterly cold day, and the students had lined up in their best, wearing their sport coats and and dresses, and their best attire, had lined up and were silently standing shoulder to shoulder as we walked Father Ted to his final resting place. And I was walking along, and I was quite composed until I saw our own son, our son Jimmy, the fourth of our children, standing with the others in his blue sport coat. And it was one of those moments where I thought, okay, this is God is good. And that meant a lot on a personal level, in addition to what it meant to see so many people celebrating Father Ted and his extraordinary life. And the other thing I'd mentioned that was stands out is, in 2014, the Board of Trustees visited Rome as an opportunity to think deeply about what it means to be a Catholic university, and also to think about our identity as a global institution. And so that was an incredible trip and an incredible set of opportunities, which culminated in an audience with Pope Francis, where we were able to receive a blessing from the Pope. And that just stands out as a really special moment in my life and in my work. So those are two things I'd mention, but it's truthfully, to be part of this place and to see the incredible contributions that many people make day in and day out. It's incredibly humbling. It's a tremendous privilege.
Yeah, those are two incredible memories, and just to think that last week we just celebrated the 6th anniversary of Father Ted's passing, and to know that his presence is still so felt throughout this campus and in the hearts of Notre Dame alumni, parents, and friends, across the globe is an amazing story. How about any surprises, Ann? Any in this role? There's had to be some moments where, whoa, you're just kind of taken aback and surprised. Anything that stands out?
I think, I'd say the things that have surprised me about the role are just in a good way. I'd say the fact that for many people, Notre Dame is very personal. That's very personal, and they have deep, deep feelings, and that can mean, when they're upset, they're really upset, and when they're happy, they're really happy. And so, the depth of the love and the emotion that the place evokes, I always knew that, and I feel that, but I say, coming into this office, that's something I see on a grander scale. And so I'd have to say, when I first came into the role, it surprised me. And the visibility of it all is also something that that I had appreciated, but perhaps not to the full extent. And I think it speaks to the importance of Notre Dame and the distinctive place it occupies, that what we do matters to people and is very visible. So those are things I've learned along the way. And so initially, so I think they fall in the category of surprises in some sense. So
How about any parting thoughts before we break off?
um, I just would say to all that are tuned in today and that are watching this, how much we miss you, how grateful we are for the prayers and the support, and we send our prayers and love back to you. The Notre Dame family is extraordinary, and you make so many things possible that are happening here on campus. As I said at the outset, when I came here as a freshman, I found a place of homecoming, and even now, the best day on campus for me is a day when I can walk across campus and see all the activity and all the good work being done, and know that Notre Dame is really living up and into its mission to be a force for good in the world. And none of that would be possible without colleagues like you, Lou, and friends like those who are watching us today. So we send our love and our thanks and our prayers.
Thank you so much, Ann. You are nothing short of a godsend to this university, to our alma mater, and you oftentimes behind the scenes you do work that is nothing short of amazing. So we're really blessed by your leadership, which is felt throughout this place and over so many years. And so thank you for that. And thank you for being such an incredible colleague and such a dear friend as well. I also want to say to all of our viewers that we'll be joined next week, not at noon, but we're going to move it to 4 o'clock because we're going to be joined by a student who was just, Alan Najomo, was just named, just elected the president of the student body. His story is amazing, of immigrant parents from Nigeria at a very young age in the States. His mother died. Alan and his father were homeless for a period of time before finding his way from Dallas to Notre Dame via the Quest Bridge program. An amazing story of this young man. You'll be inspired and filled, as Ann said before, with incredible hope for the future as you get to know him more next Wednesday, again at 4 o'clock, not at noon Eastern Standard Time. And as we always do, please join Ann and myself in closing with a prayer to Our Lady. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. My mother asked if I would please say the Hail Mary a little slower. So this one was for you. Thanks again so much, and take care.
My
God
pleasure.
bless, and
Thank
love
you.
you all.
Thank you, Lou. All right. Thanks.